My older brother and his wife tried to push me out of the home I fully paid for, so I evicted them instead. I never thought I'd have to deal with this kind of chaos. I'm 27 years old, a software engineer with a solid career, and the last thing I imagined was feeling unwelcome in my own home. But here we are. About a year ago, I purchased a 3-bedroom house in Springfield, Ohio. It's nothing overly fancy, just a cozy, modern home with a small backyard and enough space for me and my family. I even invited my parents, Carol and Gary, to live with me. My parents, both retired teachers, spent most of their lives in Hudsonville, a quiet rural town about 2 hours away. Life there was slow and predictable, but when retirement came, they decided they'd had enough. My mom kept saying, "We're too young to just sit around waiting for the grass to grow." My dad, as always, just went along with whatever she wanted. At first, their idea of moving to the city seemed reasonable. Springfield isn't a major metropolis, but it's livelier than Hudsonville, with more restaurants, shopping, and people their age. The city also worked better for my career, and I wanted to help them out. They had done so much for me growing up that giving them a place to live rent-free felt like the least I could do. I didn't hesitate when I found this house. I was proud of it. It has 3 bedrooms, a walk-in closet in the master, and an attached bathroom, exactly what I needed for privacy and comfort, especially since I work from home most of the time. Once we moved in, I set everything up exactly how I wanted it. Naturally, the master bedroom was mine. I paid for the house, so it only made sense that I'd get the best room. The second bedroom became my home office. Since I work remotely about 80% of the time, I needed it to be functional. I invested in dual monitors, a solid ergonomic chair, and everything else to create the perfect workspace. The third bedroom was a guest room. I figured it would come in handy when family visited. Simple enough. At first, everything went well. My parents were happy to be in the city, and I thought we'd settled into a good routine. My mom spent her time gardening in the small backyard, growing vegetables in raised beds, saying it reminded her of Hudsonville. My dad mostly stayed in his recliner, watching baseball games and reruns of old TV shows. They seemed content, and honestly, so was I. I worked during the day, paid all the bills, stocked the fridge, and didn't mind taking care of the house. After all, it was mine, and I took pride in it. I didn't feel burdened by the expenses because I earned a good income. 6 figures, though I don't mention that to brag. It's just to explain why covering the costs didn't bother me. My parents had modest pensions, so I never thought to ask them to pitch in. Family doesn't charge family rent, I told myself. Things were calm, simple, and predictable. But calm never lasts forever. The first hint of trouble came one morning during breakfast. I was sitting at the kitchen table, halfway through my coffee and toast, when my mom casually dropped a bombshell. "You know," she said in a light tone, "your brother Evan and Paige are thinking about moving to Springfield." I froze for a second, trying to process. Then I played it cool. "Oh? Why's that?" I asked. "They're having a rough time back in Hudsonville," she replied, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Paige is pregnant, and Evan thinks there are better opportunities here. To explain, Evan is my older brother by 2 years. He's always been the golden child in my mom's eyes. He's charming, easygoing, and has a way of making people feel bad for him, even when he's in the wrong. While I worked hard, got good grades, and followed the rules, Evan coasted on his charm. Our dynamic hasn't changed as adults. I don't dislike him, he's my brother. But I learned early on that helping him usually meant cleaning up his messes. As for Paige, his wife, she's nice enough on the surface, but has an entitled streak that's hard to overlook. When Paige wants something, she gets it, no matter how unreasonable. Combine that with the fact that she's pregnant, and I could already see where this conversation was headed. Still, I shrugged it off. Good for them, I said, taking another sip of coffee. I'm sure they'll figure things out. My mom smiled in a strange, knowing way that made me pause. She didn't say anything else, and I dropped the subject. I assumed Evan and Paige would rent an apartment in Springfield. I never imagined it had anything to do with me. I was wrong. About a week later, I came home from errands to find Evan and Paige standing in the living room surrounded by bags and boxes. Paige, holding a small duffel bag, rested her hand on her pregnant belly, while Evan set up a fan, like he'd already made himself at home. My parents were there, looking far too pleased. "Surprise!" my mom announced with a big smile. "Evan and Paige are here." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean, here?" I asked, looking at my parents, then at Evan and Paige. "They're going to stay with us for a little while," my mom explained, "just until they get back on their feet." I stared at her, waiting for a punchline that didn't come. Evan grinned like it was nothing. "Hey, man, hope this isn't too much trouble," he said. Too much trouble? I wanted to shout, "Are you kidding me?" Instead, I stood there in stunned silence. They'd moved into my house without even asking, and everyone seemed to think it was perfectly normal. "They'll stay in the guest room," my mom added, as if that made everything fine. I couldn't believe it. I should have spoken up then and there, but I didn't. Whether I was too shocked or too polite, I stayed quiet. Looking back, I regret not saying no right away, because that moment marked the start of everything falling apart. The first few days after Evan and Paige moved in were barely tolerable. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Family makes sacrifices for each other, right? But every time I walked into the living room and saw Paige sprawled on my couch, shoes off, feet up like she owned the place, my irritation grew. Evan wasn't any better, leaving his belongings scattered around. His duffel bag in the hallway, clothes draped over chairs, and smelly gym shoes by the front door. It wasn't just their presence, it was their attitude. They acted like they owned the place, offering no gratitude or help. The guest room, my guest room, was overflowing with Paige's baby supplies, boxes of clothes, and random junk. Evan dumped his things wherever he felt like it. It was clear they had no plans to be respectful or considerate. Although my mom assured me that their stay would be temporary, it quickly became clear that wasn't the case. On top of that, Paige's seemingly harmless remarks started to grate on my nerves. One afternoon, while she folded baby blankets on the couch, she said, "This house is so nice. It must take a lot of work to keep it clean all by yourself." I glanced up from my laptop, where I was trying to focus on work. "It's not too hard," I replied evenly, keeping my tone neutral. She gave me a sweet smile, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. "Well, once the baby arrives, things will get messy. We'll need plenty of room for all the baby stuff." I didn't respond, knowing exactly where this conversation was heading and deciding not to take the bait. I had convinced myself that as long as they stayed in the guest room, I could tolerate the situation. But deep down, I knew I was fooling myself. Then came the evening that pushed me over the edge. About a week after they'd moved in, I was trying to unwind after a long day. I'd spent hours on back-to-back calls, troubleshooting issues on my screen, and all I wanted to do was relax. As I entered the living room, I found Paige and Evan sitting there as if they had been waiting for me. It felt like they'd been plotting this moment all day. "Hey, Alex," Paige said, her voice sugary sweet. "Can we talk to you about something?" My body tensed immediately. "About what?" I asked, my guard up. Paige exchanged a glance with Evan, who cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well," Evan began, leaning forward, "we've been thinking. It would make way more sense for us to take the master bedroom." I stared at him, certain I hadn't heard correctly. Paige smiled as though she were explaining something obvious. You know, with the baby coming, we'll need extra space. The guest room is nice, but it doesn't have a closet. The master has the walk-in closet and private bathroom, which would be perfect for us. I blinked, trying to process what I'd just heard. You're asking for my room? Evan shrugged casually, as if it were a minor request. It just makes sense, man. You've got the office, so you're not exactly short on space, and it's just a bedroom, right? My blood boiled. Just a bedroom, I shot back. The bedroom I paid for? In the house I own? I crossed my arms firmly. No, you can stay in the guest room. That's what it's for. Paige's pleasant demeanor shifted. But there's no closet in there, she said sharply. Where are we supposed to put all the baby stuff? My jaw clenched as I fought to stay calm. That's not my problem, I said firmly. I'm not giving up my room. You're welcome to the guest room, or you can find another place to stay. Evan looked shocked, like he couldn't believe I was refusing. Come on, dude, he said defensively. We're family. You can't make a small sacrifice for us? A small sacrifice? I retorted, my tone growing sharper. I pay for this house. I cover the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, everything. You're living here for free, and now you think you can take my bedroom? Are you serious? Paige crossed her arms and glared at me. It's not like you need the space, she muttered, as though that justified her demand. I don't care, I said, standing up. I've already told you no. The guest room is plenty big. If you don't like it, you're free to leave. The room went silent. Evan looked angry, like his pride had been hurt, but Paige's expression said everything. She felt insulted, as if I'd personally wronged her. This isn't over, she muttered as she stormed off to the guest room. Evan threw me one last glare before following her, leaving me alone in the living room, seething. I sank onto the couch, trying to cool off. I couldn't believe their audacity. They'd moved into my home without asking, hadn't contributed a dime, and now they thought they could take over my bedroom. Who does that? But I wasn't backing down this time. Over the next few days, the tension in the house was unbearable. Evan and Paige avoided me, but I could hear their hushed, angry conversations through the walls. My mom, Carol, also started acting strangely. She didn't say much, but every time I walked into the kitchen, she gave me a disapproving look, like I was the one being unreasonable. Then things escalated. One morning, I had to go into the office for an important meeting. Normally, I worked from home, but this meeting couldn't be missed. Before leaving, everything in the house was in its usual place. My office was neat, and my bedroom door was shut as always. But when I came home at lunchtime, I immediately noticed something was off. My belongings, clothes, shoes, laptop, were piled carelessly in the hallway. My computer monitor was unplugged and leaned awkwardly against the wall. My chest tightened as I realized what was happening. I stormed into my bedroom and froze. Paige stood in the middle of the room, halfway through packing up my things. The bed was stripped bare, and piles of baby blankets and stuffed animals were stacked where my pillows had been. When she noticed me, she looked up, completely unfazed. "Oh, hey, Alex," she said casually, as if this were normal. "I'm just finishing up." "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Your mom said we could start moving in," she replied nonchalantly. "The baby's coming soon and we need the space." My fists clenched. "My mom said, this is my house, my room. You don't get to decide to take it." Paige gave me a look like I was the unreasonable one. "It's just a bedroom," she said dismissively. That was the breaking point. "No," I said sharply, stepping into the room. "Get your stuff out now. You're not moving into my room." Her calm mask cracked, and she scowled at me. "We need the space, Alex. You're being selfish." "Selfish?" I nearly laughed. "I pay for everything. The house, the bills, the food. And now you think you can kick me out of my own bedroom? You have 5 minutes to get your stuff out before I throw it in the yard." Her face flushed red, and she stormed past me, muttering something under her breath. I didn't care. I was done playing nice. The day after catching Paige in my room felt like the calm before a storm. But I knew better than to think it was over. Evan and Paige spent most of the day holed up in the guest room, their muffled arguments audible through the walls. Meanwhile, my parents acted as if nothing had happened, which somehow annoyed me even more. When dinner came around, the tension in the house was unbearable. It felt like you could slice through it with a knife. I had spent most of the day locked in my office, trying to focus on work and calm down, but I knew deep down I couldn't let what had happened slide. I had made it perfectly clear that my bedroom was off limits, yet Paige had felt entitled enough to pack up my belongings without permission. That was bad enough, but the final blow came later that evening. I walked into the kitchen to grab something to eat, already annoyed. As I opened the fridge, my irritation turned to outright anger. It was practically empty. 2 days ago, I had stocked it full. Chicken, vegetables, snacks, everything we needed to last the week. Now, all that was left was a few condiments, half a bottle of milk, and an expired yogurt shoved in the back. Hoping the freezer would be better, I checked it. It wasn't. The same story. For a moment, I just stood there, furious but not surprised. I knew exactly what had happened. Evan and Paige had helped themselves to everything without bothering to ask. Slamming the fridge door shut, I spun around and saw my mom standing by the stove, calmly stirring a pot. "Where's all the food?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Oh," my mom replied, not even turning to look at me. "Paige made dinner for everyone earlier." "Everyone but me, apparently." "Great," I muttered. "So what am I supposed to eat?" Finally, she turned to face me, her expression unsettlingly indifferent. "There's still some bread and peanut butter in the pantry," she said casually. Then, almost as if it was an afterthought, she added, "But Alex, if you're not going to help the family, you can't expect us to cater to you." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I froze. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. She shrugged, as if it wasn't a big deal. "You don't want to help Evan and Paige, so don't expect us to include you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was the one paying for everything in this house, including the groceries they had just eaten, and now, because I wouldn't let Evan and Paige take over my bedroom, I was being excluded from meals? "You can't be serious," I said, clenching my fists. "I'm the one paying for all of this, the house, the food, the bills, and you're saying I don't deserve to eat with you?" She turned back to the stove, unfazed. "We're family, Alex," she said, her tone calm. "And families make sacrifices. Paige is pregnant, and Evan's trying to get back on his feet. You've got a good job and everything you need. Why can't you just make this easier for everyone?" I couldn't respond. My blood was boiling, and my mind raced with thoughts of everything I had already sacrificed. I had bought this house with my own money, allowed my parents to live here rent-free, and covered every expense without asking for anything in return. Now, I was being painted as the bad guy? Without another word, I turned on my heel, left the kitchen, and slammed my office door behind me. I didn't want to hear another word from anyone. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I had reached my limit. For weeks, I had bitten my tongue and let them walk all over me. But this was the final straw. My mom had made it clear she wasn't on my side. She was so focused on helping Evan and Paige that she couldn't see how unfairly I was being treated. And Evan and Paige? They weren't going to stop pushing unless I forced them to. Determined to take action, I grabbed my laptop and started looking up eviction notices. I didn't know much about the legal process, but I was determined to figure it out. By midnight, I had completed the documents. I printed out 2 copies, one for Evan and Paige, and one for my parents. It felt surreal to write my own family's names on eviction notices, but at that point, I felt I had no choice. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, still fueled by the adrenaline from the night before. I grabbed the eviction notices from my desk and marched into the living room, where Evan and Paige were lounging on the couch. Evan looked up when he saw me, frowning. "What's up?" Without saying a word, I walked over to the coffee table and slapped the papers down in front of them. "What's this?" Evan asked, picking up the papers and scanning them. "It's an eviction notice," I said flatly. "You have 24 hours to pack your things and leave. If you're not gone by then, I'll call the police." Paige gasped, looking at me like I had just hit her. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm completely serious," I replied. "I've had enough. You've been freeloading here for weeks without contributing a thing, and now you want to take over my bedroom? No, I'm done." Evan stood, his face turning red with anger. "You can't just throw us out. We're family." "Family doesn't take advantage of each other," I snapped. "I let you stay here because I thought you needed help, but you've done nothing but disrespect me. If you can't follow my rules, you're out." Paige started crying, and Evan looked like he wanted to punch something, but I didn't care. I wasn't backing down. "Alex!" My mom's voice rang out from behind me. I turned to see her standing at the edge of the living room, holding the second set of eviction papers I had printed. "What is this?" "It's exactly what it looks like," I replied, crossing my arms. "You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. If things don't change, I'll take legal action." She looked like I had physically struck her. "You don't mean that," she said, her voice shaking. "I do," I said firmly. "I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter in my own house. I pay for everything here, and you still let Evan and Paige walk all over me. I'm done." The room went silent. My dad, who had been sitting quietly in his recliner, didn't say a word. Evan glared at me. Paige sobbed, and my mom looked devastated, but I didn't care. I had spent weeks putting up with their entitlement, their demands, and their complete lack of respect. I wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. "You have 24 hours, I said again, looking directly at Evan and Paige. "If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the cops." Without waiting for a response, I turned around and walked back to my office, slamming the door behind me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally regaining control. After I handed out the eviction notices, the house fell into an uneasy silence. It wasn't the kind of calm you feel after resolving a conflict. It was the stillness that comes before something explodes. Sitting in my office, I tried to concentrate on work, but my mind kept replaying the look on my mom's face when she saw the papers. It was as if she thought I'd betrayed her. Even though I knew I was doing the right thing, the guilt gnawed at me. Evan and Paige, unsurprisingly, were furious. I could hear their voices coming from the guest room, their whispers just loud enough to catch snippets of their argument. "He can't actually kick us out," Evan muttered. "We're family. Who does this?" Paige snapped, her voice breaking as she paced. I leaned back in my chair, pinching the bridge of my nose. I was exhausted, but deep down, a part of me still felt guilty. Maybe it was because I'd grown up believing that family was supposed to stick together, no matter what. For as long as I could remember, my parents always taught me that family comes first. I lived by that belief most of my life, but what was I supposed to do when my family treated me like a doormat? By lunchtime, my mom came to my office door and knocked gently. "Alex," she said softly, poking her head in. "Can we talk?" I let out a sigh and turned my chair around to face her. "Yeah, come in." She stepped inside and shut the door behind her. which immediately made me uneasy. That look on her face told me she was about to try to reason with me. My mom had this knack for making serious situations sound trivial, even when they were anything but. "Honey," she began gently, her voice calm, "don't you think you're overreacting just a little?" I crossed my arms. "No, Mom, I don't." She sat in the chair across from me, clasping her hands in her lap. "I understand you're frustrated," she said, "but kicking out your brother and Paige? That's going too far. She's pregnant, Alex. They need our help." "I have been helping them," I countered. "I let them move into my house without even asking. I've been paying for everything. The food, the utilities, the mortgage. And now they think they can take my bedroom too. How is that fair?" Her shoulders sagged, and she let out a heavy sigh. "It's not about fairness, Alex. Family helps family when they're struggling. Evan's just going through a rough time." I laughed bitterly. "When isn't Evan going through a rough time? He's always in some kind of mess, and you and Dad always bail him out. This time, you're doing it at my expense." For a moment, her face faltered, and I thought she might finally admit I was right. But instead, she tried a different tactic. "You have so much, Alex," she said, her tone softening. "You have a good job, a beautiful house, your health. Evan hasn't been as fortunate." "That's not my fault," I said firmly. "I worked hard for everything I have. I saved up, I bought this house, and I take care of it. I'm not going to give up my room or my peace of mind because Evan and Paige can't get their lives together." Her eyes began to glisten like she might cry. "We're not trying to take anything from you, honey," she said. "We just thought you'd want to help." "I did want to help," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. "But this isn't helping. This is letting them take advantage of me. And you're okay with it." She didn't respond right away. She sat there silently, staring down at her hands. I could see the guilt written all over her face, but at the same time, it was clear she still didn't understand how much this had pushed me to my breaking point. "Mom," I said after a pause, softening my tone, "I'm not backing down on this. I'm tired of being treated like my boundaries don't matter. If Evan and Paige can't respect me, they need to leave. End of story." She looked up at me, her face filled with resignation. "Okay," she said quietly, standing up. "I'll talk to your father." As she left, I let out a slow exhale, feeling both relieved and drained. I knew my mom wasn't happy, and I hated that it had come to this, but I wasn't going to let guilt stop me from standing my ground. By mid-afternoon, Evan finally came looking for me. He knocked once, then barged into my office without waiting for a response. Completely typical of him. "Seriously, Alex," he said, waving the eviction notice like it was some kind of joke. "You're actually kicking us out?" "You have 24 hours, I replied, not even looking up from my monitor. "That's more than fair." He scoffed and stepped closer. "You can't be serious, man. We're family. You don't just throw family out on the street." "I'm not throwing you out on the street," I said, finally meeting his glare. "You can stay in the guest room like I told you before, as long as you respect my boundaries. But if you can't do that, you need to leave." Evan ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small office like a restless animal. "How are we supposed to respect you when you're acting like this? Paige is pregnant, Alex. She needs space. She needs comfort. And you're being selfish over a stupid bedroom." I clenched my jaw tightly. "You're calling me selfish? You moved in without asking, ate all my food, and tried to take over my own bedroom in the house I bought and paid for. If anyone's being selfish, it's you." His face turned red with frustration, and I could tell he wanted to argue more. But for once, he didn't have a response. He just shook his head and stormed out, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't catch. The rest of the day passed in heavy silence. Paige stayed locked in the guest room, likely crying, while Evan sulked in the living room. My parents avoided me entirely, which I was fine with. I needed the space. That evening, as I went to the kitchen for a glass of water, I found my dad sitting alone at the table, staring blankly at nothing. I paused for a moment, debating whether I should say something, but he spoke first. "You know," he said quietly, still looking down, "your brother's not a bad guy. He needs help sometimes." I tightened my grip on the glass. "I've been helping him, Dad. More than enough." He sighed and looked up at me. "Maybe so, but this is going to change things. You know, for the family." I studied him, trying to figure out whether he was trying to warn me or guilt-trip me. "If by change things, you mean Evan and Paige will finally take responsibility for their own lives, then good. That's exactly what needs to happen." He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, like he didn't have the energy to keep pushing. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear faint sounds of Evan and Paige packing their belongings. I didn't know if they would actually leave in the morning or try to dig their heels in, but either way, I was ready. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life again. The next morning, I woke early, the weight of the situation pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the peaceful silence I had hoped for. It was tense, like everyone was bracing for the next confrontation. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed a few boxes sitting near the guest room door. They were packing. Part of me felt relieved they weren't trying to fight me anymore, but another part of me couldn't shake the resentment. They had put me in this position, made me feel like the villain in my own home, and I was still grappling with how unfair it all felt. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw my mom sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked completely exhausted, as if she hadn't slept at all. For a moment, she didn't even look up, and I wondered if she planned to ignore me entirely. Then she sighed, and, without meeting my eyes, spoke softly. "Your brother and Paige are leaving. They're leaving today," my mom said quietly, avoiding my gaze. I reached for a mug from the cupboard and poured myself some coffee. "Good," I said curtly. "They should have left a long time ago." She finally met my eyes, and I could see how tired and red they were. "Did it really have to come to this, Alex? Eviction papers? Threatening to call the police?" I put the coffee pot down harder than I meant to. "Yes, Mom. It had to come to this. I tried to be nice. I let them move in without asking for a thing. I stayed quiet when they ate all the food I bought. I ignored the mess they made. But when they tried to take my bedroom, that's where I drew the line. And you didn't support me. You took their side." She let out another sigh, shaking her head. "It wasn't about taking sides. I didn't want to see them struggle. Paige is pregnant, Alex. They don't have much." I couldn't stop a bitter laugh from escaping. "And whose fault is that? I didn't tell Evan to quit jobs every 6 months, or for Paige to act like she's entitled to everything I've worked hard for. I've worked my ass off for this house, Mom. I bought it. I pay for everything. They don't get to waltz in here and act like they own the place." She didn't argue back. I could tell she was running out of things to say. Maybe she was even beginning to see my point. "Where are they going?" I asked after a pause. "To a motel," she said softly. "At least until they figure something else out." I didn't feel good about it, but I didn't feel bad either. It wasn't my responsibility, and I wasn't going to let them guilt me into thinking it was. By noon, Evan and Paige were finally packing up the last of their things. I stayed in my office to avoid the scene, but I could hear the sounds of them moving around, doors opening and closing, bags being dragged along the floor, and their muffled conversations. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I didn't care enough to try. Eventually, there was a knock at my office door. "What?" I called out, already knowing who it was. The door creaked open, and Evan stepped in. He looked awful, exhausted, angry, and defeated all at once. At first, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me like he was trying to come up with the right words. "So this is it?" he finally asked, his voice low. "Yeah," I replied, still staring at my monitor. "This is it." He laughed bitterly. "You're really doing this? Throwing us out when Paige is pregnant. Some brother you turned out to be." I turned in my chair to face him, my patience wearing thin. "Don't do that, Evan. Don't try to make me out to be the bad guy here. I gave you a place to stay. I didn't ask for rent. I didn't ask for groceries. I let you live here for free. And you still tried to push your luck. You thought you could take my room. That's not on me. That's on you." Evan's jaw tightened. I could tell he wanted to argue, but he knew I was right. Instead, he muttered under his breath, "Whatever," and turned toward the door. "Evan," I said, stopping him just before he left. He paused but didn't turn around. "You need to figure this out," I continued. "You can't keep expecting everyone else to fix your problems. You're going to be a dad soon. Start acting like it." He didn't say anything, just shook his head and walked out. I stayed in my office until I heard the front door shut for the last time. When I finally stepped out, the house felt different. The guest room was completely empty, just a bare mattress and a couple of hangers left in the closet. The silence was overwhelming, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel oppressive. In the living room, my parents were sitting in silence. My dad was in his recliner, staring at the floor, while my mom sat on the couch, deep in thought. When she noticed me, she opened her mouth to speak, but didn't say anything. I didn't give her a chance to start. "I'm not sorry for what I did," I said, my voice steady. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way, but I'm not sorry for standing up for myself." She gave a faint nod, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of understanding in her expression. "We'll figure it out," she said quietly. I just hope you don't hate us for how it all turned out." "I don't hate you," I said truthfully. "But things have to change. I'm not going to let anyone take advantage of me in my own home ever again." She didn't argue. She just nodded again, and I left her there to reflect. That evening, for the first time in weeks, I sat alone in the living room. I turned on the TV and let myself relax. The tension that had been suffocating me for so long was finally gone. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was exactly what I needed. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house truly felt like mine again.